Dear friends, every person goes through 4 stages in life: birth, aging, illness, and death. These are inevitable stages of nature that no one can avoid. But what matters is not how long we live, but how we live. And as we enter the later years, will we experience peace and warmth, free of regrets? Today, I want to share with you the 5 key signs that may indicate an elderly person is nearing the end of their life journey. I share these not to cause fear or anxiety, but to help us live more fully, love more deeply, and prepare ourselves as well as our loved ones for a gentle transition. Have you ever heard stories like this? A senior who, just a few days ago, was still healthy, going to the market and welcoming guests. But a week later, even just a few days later, you hear that they have passed. When we hear this, we are often shocked and ask, how did they leave so quickly? There was no illness. But we can only sigh and think maybe they were just getting weak. But in reality, the body may have been signaling for some time, we just weren't paying attention. As the old saying goes, life and death are predestined, but it also teaches that we should be aware of the signs we receive. If we're perceptive, we can recognize subtle yet profound signals from the body or spirit, not to change fate, but to allow for a gentler conclusion and to be present with one another when it's most needed. There are many elderly people who live alone, with their children and grandchildren busy with their own lives, spending each day in solitude. They long for someone to talk to, someone to share a meal with, or simply for a hot cup of tea. Just that small gesture can ease their loneliness. Recognizing these signs isn't just for children and grandchildren to understand how to care for elderly parents and grandparents, but also for those of us who are getting older to listen to our own bodies and spirits, to let go of burdens, and to prepare ourselves for a peaceful state of mind each day. Let me share these signs with you, one by one, slowly, so that you can reflect on whether you or someone you care about are showing these signs. This will help us love more deeply and take better care of one another. I will save the 5th sign for the end, as it is the one most people overlook, and by the time they realize it, it's often too late. But now let's begin with the 1st sign, which marks the start of understanding and love in the final years of life, gently and profoundly. The first sign I want to share with you, which is also the most obvious, is when an elderly person starts eating less, even losing interest in food. Do you remember how, before each meal was a time for gathering, the elderly would sit at the head of the table, eating and chatting, even complimenting dishes that were especially tasty? But one day, you may notice that the elderly person, or even yourself, no longer has an appetite and just sits at the table, hardly picking up their chopsticks, even for their favorite dish. Some may only take a few bites and put down their chopsticks. Some days they may only drink a little water or have a small bowl of thin porridge. Many people in the household may think they're just tired or not feeling well, but this could be the first sign that the body is starting to close down its journey. I want to tell you about Mr. Min, a close neighbor of mine. He was always very healthy and enjoyed his meals, especially when his daughter-in-law made the famous braised fish he loved. Every meal he would eagerly look forward to it. But recently when I visited him, I noticed he just sat there staring at the food, only taking a few bites before stopping. His daughter urged him to eat more, but he just smiled and said, "Everything tastes bland now, I'm not hungry." Everyone thought it was just a loss of appetite, and he would get better. But a few weeks later, his weight dropped noticeably, and his body grew weaker each day. Then one morning, he quietly passed away in his sleep, like a breeze fading away. That's when everyone remembered that his lack of appetite wasn't just because he wasn't interested in food, but rather a subtle farewell his body was signaling. As we age, our digestive system slows down, our organs retreat, and we no longer experience hunger or thirst as we once did. You may notice that when you were younger, everything tasted good, but as we get older, food seems less appealing, and even a small amount of food can make us feel full. Many families, worried, try to force the elderly to eat more, thinking it's necessary to have strength. But pushing them to eat only tires them more, and can even cause frustration. I understand that children and grandchildren worry, but what's most important isn't the quantity of food, but the lightness of each meal. If you notice a loved one eating less, don't scold or force them to eat more. Instead, ask gently, "How are you feeling today? Is there a dish you'd like to have?" Then choose softer, easy-to-digest foods, and keep the seasoning light. Sometimes, a bowl of fragrant porridge or a sweet light soup can warm an elderly person's heart more than the finest feast. And more importantly, sit beside them during the meal, serve them a bite, and talk about the past, asking a few simple questions. That alone can turn a meal from a task into a cherished moment. If you notice that you yourself are eating less, don't worry too much. It could be that your body is slowing down and gently reminding you to live more peacefully, without rushing. This isn't something to fear. What's truly worrisome is not having anyone to listen to you or understand you. So I encourage those of you who are children or grandchildren to be more perceptive, not just focusing on whether the food is nutritious, but also paying attention to the eyes, the tone of voice, and the presence of your elderly loved one at the table. Because sometimes the first quiet goodbye begins with a pair of chopsticks gently being set down. The second sign I want to share is a decrease in social interaction and talking. It's common for the elderly to suddenly lose interest in conversation. They may not ask as many questions nor tell stories about the past as they used to. Can you recall a time when there was an elderly person in the house who was once very lively, always talking and sharing stories about their youth, their time in the military, or their life when they were raising children? Now, they sit quietly, offering only short answers like yeah or no. There are even days when they sit in silence, staring out of the window. Family members might get worried or even scold them for being so quiet. Why aren't you talking today? What's going on? But in reality, it may not be that they are upset or grumpy, but rather that they are withdrawing inwardly, quietly approaching the final chapter of their life. As the body weakens, the energy to engage in conversation diminishes. I once visited an elderly woman in the neighborhood who was always cheerful, offering tea and chatting with visitors. One day after I sat down, she looked at me and softly said, "I think my time here is coming to an end. Lately I've been seeing my mother visit me in my dreams." Her words stopped me in my tracks, not because of what she said, but because of the look in her eyes. It was as though she was gazing far into the distance, to a place where loved ones who had passed before her were waiting to welcome her. These were not just vague or nonsensical words. It was her gentle way of preparing for the inevitable. But unfortunately, many families dismiss these signs, often scolding them, "Stop saying such things. Don't talk nonsense." At that moment, what the elderly person needs most is to be listened to feel understood. They don't need to speak more, nor do they need to be left alone in silence. For those of us who are still healthy, sometimes the greatest gift we can offer is simply being present, sitting quietly next to them, offering a warm touch without needing to speak much. Do you remember the quiet afternoons when just having your children or grandchildren sit beside you, pour you a cup of tea, and gently pat your back made your heart feel light and content? You don't need loud conversations or constant laughter, just the presence of love is the greatest gift in the final years of life. And if you find yourself speaking less, feeling less inclined to share, don't worry. This doesn't mean you're closing off your heart. It could be that you need some quiet time to reflect on life, to prepare your spirit for the journey ahead. But if there are people around you who are willing to listen, don't hesitate to speak, to share, to express what's left unsaid. Because sometimes the things we leave unsaid today may be impossible to say tomorrow. I'll stop here for now and continue sharing the next signs in our next conversation. These signs are part of understanding the later years, preparing with love and living gently as we approach the inevitable with peace and calm.